My name's Yale. This is my wife Autumn, and we just wanted to take a minute and tell our adoption story. Basically, our story starts way before kids ever came into the picture, and really starts when we were engaged. So we knew that someday we wanted to adopt kids, but we didn't really know what that would look like. And we knew from the very beginning that having a kid that is adopted is not just for people that couldn't have kids. We really feel like the Bible's serious when it says take care of the widows and orphans. But we decided from the very beginning that we were going to wait until 5 years in to even really talk about having kids because we wanted to have a solid marriage to base that on.
So we got married and then we blinked and it was 5 years later. And we realized, hey, we should start having this conversation about starting a family and what that's going to look like for us.
Mm-hmm. So we just naturally assumed that we would have a birth kid first and we would have our own kid, and we started to look down that path, and then we realized, I don't think that's what God's calling us to. So we kind of took a pause for a bit and wanted to make sure that having kids was even the right direction, and prayed through that, and through a lot of prayer and fasting and asking God to move, we realized that having a kid is really just serious discipleship. It's taking somebody who you can really pour into more than anyone else, and it didn't get in the way of ministry. It actually encouraged ministry and built ministry. So we started talking about what that would look like and realized that we thought God was really calling us to not have biological children first, but to adopt first. To really show that the adopted kid is not a secondary kid, is not a secondary part of our family, but it was primary and was the first thought. So we started down the road of adoption, and if you have ever experienced that or known somebody that has done that, it's insane.
Overwhelming.
It's insane. There's the international side, and then there's the domestic side, and we went domestic, so we didn't even really go down that crazy tunnel of craziness. And we went with the domestic side, and even in that, there's Department of Child Services and going through foster care. And there's the private stuff where you can do a private adoption from birth, and then there's private where you know the person, and it's later. You can do even with the public side through DCS. There's private companies that represent you, and it's just insane. So we started to look at what the best option was, and as usual, when we try to find the best option, we usually fail. So we prayed and we asked God, "What do we do? Where do we go with this?" And we honestly feel like God told us to go down the worst option path, and he worked in it anyway, and that was what he had for us. So we went with the Department of Child Services.
So we started going down the route of DCS, and we started making phone calls to figure out what that process looked like, and they sent us tons of paperwork, and they told us that typically for people, when they go this option, it takes about 8 months to go through the process of everything from filling out paperwork and that initial phone call all the way through trainings and home studies and interviews and all kinds of other things before you're put on the list to receive children. And so in typical Yale and Autumn fashion, we just decided it wasn't going to take us 8 months.
6 weeks.
So we finished it all in 6 weeks. We had done all of the training, we'd done all the paperwork, all the interviews, everything was finished in 6 weeks. And we're like, okay, God, we did our part. Now it's in your hands. And they put us on the list to receive kids.
Yeah. One thing to know about the Department of Child Services is that's where foster care comes from, or where that term comes from, if you don't know that. And basically, they would be giving us kids that we would have in our home for a little while, and the chances of adopting them are pretty slim. Mm-hmm. And we'd be watching these kids with the possibility of adoption someday down the road. So we were told that we would get a call pretty quick, that we would get all this done pretty quick once the license was put through. Right. And in Indianapolis, there's so many foster kids that basically 1 out of every 100 people in the middle of the city in Marion County is a foster kid, is a kid that was taken out of their home because of abuse and neglect and all those things. And it's gut-wrenching. But what that means is that you get a call really quickly. So they processed our paperwork, we thought, and let me just say, when God calls you to something, you got to do it even when it's terrible. And the Department of Child Services was absolutely terrible. They lost our paperwork, then our caseworker went on family medical leave, so they just kind of let us slip between the cracks, even though we called twice a week. And eventually they gave us to another caseworker who found out that they lost all our paperwork, and we got to do it all again. Yeah,
which was super fun.
So they do all that, and then eventually we almost got finished with this lady, and then our original caseworker came back, so they had to give it back to her, and we waited in line for a while with her. And all things considered, that what took us 6 weeks and should have taken 8 months ended up taking 14 months. So a year and a couple months later, we finally got all this done. And even when that was done, we got our license to have foster kids, and we didn't get a phone call. But one night I woke up in the middle of a dead sleep with a dream that was so vivid and so real that I shot awake. Like, I was just like, oh my gosh. And I reached out to me and I grabbed Autumn and was like, Autumn, wake up. And she's like, what is going on? And I was like, I just had this dream. Like, I saw our kids. I know, like, it's crazy. God showed us our kids, like, and showed me our kids. And it was just this crazy thing. And she was like half asleep and like, what is going on? And she grabbed a notepad and like started writing down. And I had this dream that there were these 3 kids, and one was kind of like blurred out. I don't know, it was kind of a weird thing. Like, but I saw these 2 other kids, and one of them was this cute little girl who had this kind of big nose and these big like chubby cheeks, and was just this bubbly little kid. And I saw a lot of who that kid was, but the boy that was sitting there, I saw so vividly. It was almost scary. And God doesn't really speak to me in dreams generally, but it was just so real and so vivid that I explained what this kid looked like for 5 minutes, and Autumn jotted down these notes of like, okay, like, it was just so specific that it was like, this is crazy. And that week, that really kind of spurred us. We're like, okay, God's doing something, and we just need to be responsible to do what God's calling us to do. So Autumn started calling DCS like twice a day.
Right, I just kind of started blowing up their phone. And I would call and I would say, hey, this is Autumn Wall, wondering if you guys have any new news for us. And they kept saying, no, just wait for a phone call, just wait for a phone call. And I would call back and say, are you sure we're on the list? Because you keep saying we're going to get a phone call and nothing's happening. And a couple weeks went by and another month went by. And finally I talked with someone who said, what's your name again? And I said, it's David Wall and Autumn Wall are our legal names. And this is what I'm trying to get accomplished here. And she kind of paused for a minute. I could hear some shuffling, and then she said, you're not on the list. Did you guys fill out all of your paperwork?
So DCS strikes again.
So we got everything figured out, and she found our paperwork that they had not lost another time. And she said, okay, so when are you guys wanting to be put on the list? And I was like, well, now would be good.
A year ago. Yeah.
So she said, okay, well, let's get this taken care of. And that was a Monday afternoon. And she said, I'll get it taken care of and I'll call you back. Sure. Okay. Heard that before. Hung up the phone. And then a couple hours later on that evening, that Monday evening, we got a phone call back from her. And she said, okay, we've got everything figured out. You're on the list. So hopefully you'll get a phone call soon. And we'd heard that before. So, thank you so much. Have a great day. Hung up the phone, and went to bed that night.
Yeah.
So the next morning, woke up, went to work as normal, and I'm sitting at my desk doing random paperwork, and my cell phone rings. And I didn't recognize the number, so I picked it up, and it was DCS. The very next morning, after they had just told us the night before, and so I was a little shocked, and the lady on the phone said, we have a 2-year-old little boy and a baby girl that need a home. Are you guys willing? My first thought was, an infant? Like a baby? Like, what do we do with the baby? I was kind of expecting, like, because they had told us if it's the sibling group, it's going to be, the youngest you're going to get is 3. It's probably going to be like 3 to 8 years old, or it's going to be the age of the kids. And I know Yale had the dream about what our kids were going to be like and everything, and I was trying to believe in that and pray into that with him. But when she said infant, I got a little bit nervous. And so I was like, okay, well, let me talk to my husband and I'll call you back. And she's like, okay, just call me back as soon as you can. We need to find a place for them. And I was like, okay, fine. So I hung up the phone and I took a deep breath and called Yale. And he was meeting for discipleship with Scott. And I was like, hey, can I interrupt you for a minute? I just got a phone call from DCS, and they have a 2-year-old boy and a baby girl in the hospital, and they want us to come get them. What do you think?
I was sitting with a friend of mine, Scott, over coffee and just talking through things, and he'd actually adopted a girl with his wife a couple of years earlier than that, and we were actually talking about this whole process, and I was just kind of pouring my heart out, and I get a call from Autumn, and my rule is, doesn't matter who I'm meeting with, I pick up my wife's call. So I pick it up, and I'm like, hey, what's going on? I feel like I could tell more of what was happening off of Scott's face and how he was responding to what apparently was on my face. And Autumn said, they've got 2 kids, and it's exactly what God was speaking. What do you think? And I instantly knew, this is them. These are the kids.
Yeah. I mean, we took time over the phone for just a second to pray about it, but I mean, it was like, Jesus, what are you speaking? And both of us just instantly, these are our kids. Like, that was just the phrase that God spoke to both of us separately in that moment was, these are your kids. So Gil said, I guess the answer is yes, call him back. So I called the lady back and I said, great, what do we have to do? And she said, the baby's in the hospital, but they're having some complications. So can you come pick up the little boy? His name is Ben, and he's going to be at the DCS office later on this afternoon.
Yeah, we drove down there, terrified, not really sure what to do, and we pulled into the parking lot and realized that like the car seat was still in the box in the back seat, and we're like, how big is he? Is this the right car seat size? How do you put this thing in? Does he know how to strap himself in? And I was like, no, he's 2. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what did we get into?
What are we doing?
So we're just nervous like that, and we start walking towards the door. Like it's one of those moments where like you never forget what it felt like. And we walk in, and I remember like kind of scanning the room and looking at this kid and just locking eyes to him. And Autumn just goes, that's him. Like, that's him, isn't it? Like, the dream I had was so specific, and, like, she knew, like, that was him. And I was like, that's him. And, man, we were just like, oh, don't even know what to think now. But they introduced us to him, and he didn't speak at all. He didn't really know how, just kind of playing with a toy in the corner. And we talked to the caseworker that was there that said, yeah, this has been... didn't check our IDs, didn't make us sign anything.
She just said, are you David and Autumn? And we said yes. And she said, okay, that's Ben. That's the one you're taking.
So we pick him up and I walk out and we're like...
We walked out of the door. We're like, now we have a kid.
What?
What is our life?
I know. We ridiculously got him in this car seat. Probably didn't do it right. I don't know. Like, we were so nervous, and we drove out and we're like, we don't know, like, he's not talking. We don't know if he understands what we're saying. Like, we just kind of like, we're in silence, like whispering, like, I don't know what to do. It was crazy.
And I remember there was this one moment on our drive home where there was a fire truck. So there were sirens and they were coming past us the other direction, and Yale kind of pulled off on the side of the road. And when the fire truck and the ambulances and the police cars went by and the sirens were going and they were flashing, Ben had just a meltdown. Just like instantly the sirens just triggered him, and he just started screaming and crying in the back seat. And that was one of those moments where it was just like, we really don't know what we're doing. Like, what do we do now? And like, didn't know how to comfort him. We didn't know what to do. And he was just sitting in the back seat crying. And so we just reached back and held his hand for a few minutes, and then we kind of kept driving.
We went home. And we got home, and friends of ours brought us Panera for dinner, and we sat there, and he ate like 2 bites, and we didn't really know what to do with him. He was almost 3 years old. He was 2, like a month away from being 3. And we found out that night he knew 2 words. He knew mommy and cookie. He said cookie a lot. He had that one down. And he was a little bit nervous about us, just didn't really know what to do. We brought our dog over, Zara, who was a puppy at that time, and he got to play with her, and we said dog, and he said dog, 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 and like he couldn't get the words out. And I remember just looking at him and looking into his eyes. It was just empty. He'd just been so neglected and so abused that he was lifeless. There was just nothing in him. And
he didn't smile. He didn't play. We would put toys in front of him, and he would just look at them like he didn't know what to do.
The best thing that we could do is sit with him and tickle him, and he'd laugh, and that was pretty much the most like life we could get out of him. And we sat there with him for a while and watched TV for a little bit, and we just tried to kind of make it, is really all we could do that night. So then we took him upstairs to put him in his crib, and that kind of solid, mellow thing went away very quickly. And we put him down in the crib, and he crawled and screamed to get out of that thing like we were hurting him. We came to find out that he had been left in his crib for days on end, and was just completely neglected, and they'd throw him in there and walk away. And it was just gut-wrenching to see him trying to get out of that to survive. So that first night we slept downstairs, and Autumn slept on the couch, and I slept in a recliner, and he laid on top of me for half the night and laid with Autumn for the other half. And instantly something shifted in him. Yeah. And from the very beginning, if you've ever met Ben, like he had this look of like, I know you've saved me. Like, I know you pulled me out of something. And that was just hard to see. Yeah. But he's such a great kid, and he was a shadow then of who he is now. Yeah. He's just the most energetic, loving kid, and I don't think anyone like, you can just walk through the mall and people just look at him and smile. Like he just has this thing about him. And he didn't then, but over time he got to be that.
So the next morning, we called back the caseworker again, because they had told us to call back the next day to find out the status on the baby and what we were going to do there. So we called back the next morning, and she said, I think you're good to go. This is the hospital she's in. Go to this area, and they'll let you in. So we went to the specific door that they sent us to, and we went into the hospital, and they would only let one of us in. We had Ben with us, so they would only let one of us in. So I went back in the nursery, and there was Ellie, laying in the little little plastic bed thing. And one of those great moments where, I mean, she was so cute. Oh my gosh, she was the cutest little baby. And so just kind of instantly connected with her, and the nurse said, you can pick her up if you want to. So I held her, and then all the nurses that were in there, when they saw me come in, they knew that there was an adoptive family or a foster family coming in, and they were just, oh, you're going to love her. She's so precious. She's such a good baby. We all just adore her. She's so sweet. She had been there for a couple of days at that point, and was kind of working through some of the dependencies and things that she had from birth. And so after I held her for a little while, they said, okay, well, let's get you set up in a room, and we'll go get your husband and her brother and get you guys set up. And so they took us down to a hospital room, and this is probably the moment I think of all that I will never forget. Then they walked out. And that was the moment that I panicked, to be honest. Because I was like, what now what do we do? Like, and she was just asleep. She's just laying there peacefully. And so I was like, okay, well, do we leave her there? Do we pick her up? Do we feed her? Do we change her? What are we supposed to do? She's so little. Like, can we pick her up? I don't know what to do. And it was like this panic moment. And
luckily she wasn't alone for long.
Right.
Because they called me and Ben back there, and the two of us came back, and this kid that we had just met, we got to introduce him to his sister, which was a crazy thing in itself. And we walked in and showed him his sister, and he got to sit there and kind of get to look at her and get to connect with her. And it was just a really sweet moment to see the two of them together. So another really incredible thing about Ellie was her name. I remember seeing what name was on that birth card thing in the hospital, and it said it was Elizabeth Diane. And Elizabeth is my mom's middle name and my grandmother's first name. And Autumn's middle name is Diana, almost Diane, and her mom's name is Diana. And honestly, if we were to have a little girl, that's what we would have named her. Yeah. So it was just incredible that God had done that from the very beginning. Autumn spent the night in the hospital that first night with her, and I took Ben home alone, so both of us were terrified. Didn't really know what to do in our own little worlds, and the
nurses did come back and helped us know what to do. And
yeah, they were
eased my mind a little bit.
But we just realized that night, like, everything was different. we weren't going back. So the next day, we brought Ellie home from the hospital, and because of some things the birth parents had done, and they tried to take her out of the hospital, that's why we were in a different wing. We put her in the car, and they told us not to drive straight home. They said take a weird pass, stop a couple times. It was kind of surreal, something you don't really think about having to do until you're in that situation. So we took a weird path home, and we got there. The kids were home, and it was right. It was family. It was good.
So we got them home and had, honestly, a pretty good first 4 weeks with them. It was decently peaceful, and about 2 days after we brought them home was a Thursday, and so we had life group. And we thought, well, who knows how to take care of kids better than the family's life group? So we just jumped right in and went to life group, and that was a really, really sweet moment for us personally, just watching. I mean, we had seen a bunch of people from the church that had come over to support us, but watching our life group just in that moment surround us and be an encouragement to us, and then also just surrounding the kids in that moment was a really awesome.
The kids, like every time we did anything with church, everyone was all over being a part of that.
Yeah.
I think that's a part of what makes church such an amazing thing, and makes being a part of the church as a whole so huge, is that you don't do it alone.
Yeah. And honestly, things like foster care, it makes it possible because you're not alone. Yeah. But that was a really neat thing that happened. And then also in that first month, there were a couple things that God spoke to us about Ben and about Ellie. One, we felt like God told us that Ben's a warrior. And we saw so much of that come out in the coming years. And then we felt like God said that Ellie is a fireball, that she is going to leave a wake of fire behind her wherever she goes. And so that's very true. That's very true.
And those things really came to pass pretty quick. The first month was great, but at the end of that first month, we got a call that the parents had kind of come back into the picture and were wanting visitation with the kids. And the first time we dropped off the kids for visitation was gut-wrenching. Seeing these people that had so abused this kid that was becoming our son was so hard to watch. And seeing when we went, I had known Ben for a month at this point, and when he saw them, he shrunk back and grabbed onto my leg and would not let go. And we legally had to pry him off to say, you have to go see these people. So for the next few months, 4 or 5 months, we had to go to these visitations. And every single time, it was like Ben had gone 4 steps forward and then 2 steps back every time he went to one of these visitations. And he would kind of crawl back into himself, and we realized that he had some pretty deep issues from some of the abuse, which is obvious, and had PTSD from the things that he'd gone through. And it was hard to see that. But by far, the hardest part of this whole thing was when we got a call from their caseworker. And she said to Autumn, we're coming to get the kids tomorrow. They're going to live with their grandparent, and they're going to be gone. And I remember I was downtown meeting with somebody, and I left. I was like, I gotta go. And I just walked and got in the car and went to Autumn and went to be with the kids. And I remember vividly thinking, I know God spoke this. There's no question that they are our kids, and we are standing on the truth that God spoke that. But that doesn't mean they don't go home for a season and back to the abuse. We spent a good chunk of that day teaching Ben how to defend himself and how to protect Ellie. And to this day today, when you ask Ben, what's your job? He'll say, protect Ellie. To have to do that, I can't even express to you how hard that is. So we knew that God had spoken that they were our kids, but there's nothing to say they weren't going home. And we called everybody, and put it on Facebook, and we said, look, pray.
Please pray.
Pray. And I am 100% convinced that they were our kids regardless, but the reason they didn't go home that next day was because of prayer. Because we had family in Texas and California and friends all over the country, all over the world, that were getting on their faces and praying and saying, God, you got to get in the way of this. You got to do something. And the next day we had court, and we went in and did not go as we expected. Went much better. And God had put an incredible guardian ad litem, who's kind of the person watching out for the kids, an incredible lawyer, and an incredible judge who really just wanted to protect the kids, and they shot the whole thing down. They said, no, they're in a safe place, they're staying there. And man, if we didn't know God was in it before, we knew then. So after that time, there were multiple other times, a couple other times where they said that they might have to go home, and we saw the direct result of abuse and people doing some really terrible things and seeing what was happening. It was a hard season, a very hard season. But Ben kept growing and kept getting closer and closer to being on par with where he should be for his age. He was about 2 years behind at 2.5 years old. And he's gotten so much further, and he's at par with where he needs to be. And God just did so much over that year. And every day they were more and more they were our kids from day one, but the Department of Child Services asks less questions as you're older, and they're kind of less invasive, and they become more and more your kids. And eventually the parents fizzled out and stopped trying, and their rights were terminated, which was a huge day when we knew that their whole plan had changed to adoption in this foster care system. And even from then, adoption takes forever. But one day I got a phone call, and they said, I think we have a date. And I walked outside, and Autumn was working in the yard, and I was like, hey, Autumn, do you have anything going on Tuesday? And she's like, I don't know, I can check my calendar. I was like, well, sure. You can probably cancel. I don't know. What do you think about adopting a couple of kids on Tuesday?
It took me a second to realize what he was saying. But then he said, our lawyer just called. Court date is Tuesday morning. And I don't really remember a ton of what went through my head, but I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is all going to be over. And I just remember hitting the ground and crying, and Yale coming and hugging me. And yeah, there was a great moment of realization of just all of the things that God had spoken from the beginning of these are your kids was going to be true, actually true.
So October 3rd, 2017, we walked into a courthouse with our kids who'd been foster kids for a year and a half at that point, almost 2 years. It was all pretty quick, but they just asked our kids, who do you want to be your parents? And they both said us. And it was an incredible thing to see all this stuff that God had spoken for so long coming to happen. So I want to introduce you to our kids. Come on over here, guys. So the adoption was finalized, and it was amazing because everything changed and nothing changed all at the same time. What does adoption mean?
Us forever.
Yeah, it means you're with us forever. It means family forever.
Family forever.
It was incredible.
Forever.
Yeah. Just to see what God did through all that was amazing. And we thought that, that's the end of our adoption story. It's great to see what God did. But God had other plans. And remembering back to that original dream that we had, there was a third kid. This is Kaylee. So Kaylee is Ben and Ellie's birth sister. So I'll tell you that story, but these guys probably don't want to sit here forever. And this one wants food.
So we got a phone call on adoption day from the kids' caseworker, and she said, hey guys, congratulations on the adoption. By the way, just got a tip that Ben and Ellie's birth mom is pregnant again. She didn't really know anything beyond that. She had just gotten a tip from somebody random that said she's pregnant. And she said, would you guys be willing to take the baby if there's a baby sometime in the future? And obviously we prayed about it, but really the biggest thing was we remembered back to Yale's dream where he clearly saw Ben, and there was a little girl with chubby cheeks, and then there was another one. And so it was just kind of that light bulb moment for us of course this is God. We have to say yes. And so we told her, yeah, call us.
So in typical fashion, as is our story, it did not happen like we expected. 2 months later, we were expecting that to be like 5 months down the road or something.
More.
Yeah, but 2 months later, I was working on something for work and just had a Starbucks on my laptop, and I got a phone call from our lawyer who had finalized the adoption of Ben and Ellie. And he said, hey, so Ben and Ellie's birth mom just had another baby, and they called me. And yeah, we're going to get them set up with a family, and we just wanted to know if you wanted to have some kind of connection. And we were like, whoa. We want the baby. we knew about her. We knew about all this stuff going on. And we already told DCS we wanted her, and he was like blown away. He was like, I have never had this happen. Okay. So what happened was they handed her a sheet when she said she wanted to give the baby up for adoption of 30 to 40 different lawyers in the city that did adoptions. And she literally eeny, meeny, miny, mowed it and called our lawyer out of all of them. And he was like, that's just unbelievable. There's no chance that could have happened. I was like, yeah, that's God. And he was like, yeah, it's a really big coincidence. I'm like, no, it's God. So he said, so you're interested in adopting? And we said, yeah. And he's like, well, this wouldn't be like DCS. This would be a private adoption. So he said, do you have $40,000? And I said, no. So he was like, okay, well, can you get it together? And I was like, look, we'll do whatever it takes. Yeah. We know God's speaking this. We'll do whatever it takes. Let me call my wife, make sure she's good with this, because this whole thing's changed. But yeah, and I called her, and we were both just like on edge, like this is crazy. And we were like, we know God's saying yes, but I don't know. And then, but I feel like he's saying yes, but what do we do? And we called people, like it was just, this was not like the first time. This was back and forth, like what is happening? And we said, okay, this is definitely what we feel like God's telling us to do. So in the span of about half an hour, our whole lives flipped again, and found out there was this third kid, and then we said yes. And the lawyer called back and said, hey, instead of $43,000, we can do it for $17,000. And we were like, okay, don't know where that's coming from, but
still a lot of money.
But we'll make it happen. We'll figure it out. And 2 hours later, we were in the hospital meeting our baby girl.
Yeah, so we were standing in the room holding Kaylee, and we were talking to the lawyer. He was there with us, and he had told us that their mom didn't want to know anything about the adoption. She didn't want to know who was adopting Kaylee. She hadn't even held her. She didn't want anything to do with the process at all this time around. So we had kind of told the lawyer, like, hey, well, we had kind of had some relationship with her, and if you can work it into the conversation, if it's appropriate to let her know that it's us, we really think that she would want to know that it was us. And lo and behold, he actually ended up getting to say that to her. And when he told her that it was us, he said that she just broke down weeping in the hospital room and asked to see us. So we got to go over. We left Kaylee in the nursery with the nurses, and we got to go down to be with the birth mom and spend some time with her. And when we walked in, it was the same reaction. I mean, she just absolutely emotionally lost it and
just ran over to Autumn and just bear hugged her for a solid 2 minutes.
Yeah. It was a really great moment. Just getting to be with her for a few minutes there. We were able to kind of give her an update on Ben and Ellie and how they had been doing, and show her some pictures of them. And it was just a really healing moment for her, I think, to be able to see that her kids were happy and healthy and in a safe place. And you could just really tell that she was so thankful for the way that things had turned out, and that she knew that this was what was right. And so we ended up getting to sit and spend some time with her, and she was just saying, how in the world did this happen? Like, how did you guys find out about this? And I can't believe they called you, and all these things. And we got to just share with her, hey, look, that lawyer that you randomly picked was the lawyer that did Ben and Ellie's adoption for us. And she said the same thing he said, oh, what a coincidence. And we said, no, it's God. And of all the hospitals you could have had the baby in, it was this one, and all the lawyers that you picked, it was ours. And the fact that he recognized your name on a piece of paper and put it together with us and called us in the moment, like all of this is not coincidence, it's God. And so we got to share the gospel with her there and just talk about Jesus and how much he loves her.
She said, well, how could he love me with everything I've done? And we just got to say, look, he loves you so much, enough to intervene in your life. And God loves you so much, he sent his son Jesus to die for you. And she just broke down.
Yeah. After that, she ended up, even though she had said she didn't want to see the baby and she didn't want to know anything about the process, she ended up coming down with us to the nursery and she held her. And she asked us what her name was, and we told her we were going to name her Kaylee. It was just a really healing moment, I think, for her and for us too, to get to kind of share that together and see that all come to fruition and all of this be together and the kids, all three of the kids being together.
The next morning, we went to go see her, and she was coming off of some drugs, and I got to have a pretty great conversation with her.
Yeah, I got to, when I went in the next morning, like Yale said, she was coming off of drugs, so I just went in and he stayed in the hallway. She was telling me, she said, Autumn, I didn't sleep all night. And I said, no, I'm sure. I can't even imagine what all you're going through. And she said, no, it has nothing to do with the drugs and withdrawal. Like, that's rough, yeah. But she said, I couldn't stop thinking about what you guys said. Do you really think that God can love me, even with all the things that I've done and all the ways that I've messed up and all the hurt that I've caused? Do you really think he can love me that much? I can't fathom that. And so I said, absolutely, he loves you. When we read the Bible, it tells us about how the way that we come to know Christ is not based on anything that we've done, but it's based on him. And the fact that Jesus came to this earth and lived a perfect life and completely sinless, and he died on the cross just so that he could take all the junk that we've done. And we've all done so much junk. And, this is just resonating in her. I could see it in her eyes. And so I just got to share with her. But when Jesus rose from the dead and he conquered your sin and your death, like, it changed everything. And in that moment, he took on all the sin, all the things that you've ever done and I've ever done and all of us have ever done, and made a way for us to be able to walk in freedom from these things. And she's just emotional and weeping and crying. And so I just said, is that something you want? She said, yes, absolutely. I want that. So I explained to her what it means to give your life to Jesus and what it means to walk in freedom and walk in the restoration that God has for her, and get involved in a church family and have people around her that are going to support her and get in the right kind of circumstances just in life, and getting away from drugs. And we kind of talked through all of that briefly and quickly. And I talked her through what you do giving your life to Jesus. Just, it's not anything crazy or ridiculous. It's just praying and saying, okay, Jesus, I trust you. You have control of my life, and turning everything over to him. And she told me, she said, I want to do that. I want this.
But I remember when we first went into this whole foster care thing, a good friend of ours who had adopted kids out of foster care, he was one of the first people we told, and I said, hey, this is what we're doing. And he started to kind of tear up on the phone. He said, you know what you're doing right now? And I was like, what? And he's like, you're not just helping a kid, you are taking an entire generation back from the enemy. And that's what it was. Not just seeing our two kids be pulled away from the enemy and seeing that generation healed, but seeing the generation above that healed. And it was just so cool to see how God's hand in this was not just for these two kids, but it was for an entire family to transform what was happening in a place where the enemy was having his way. One thing that we didn't mention earlier is that Ellie and Kaylee, when they were born, both had drugs in their system. Ellie, by miracle of God, and everyone in the hospital said so, didn't have anything that really stuck with her, and she was able to go home after a couple days. But that's not what happened with Kaylee. Kaylee was spared from a lot of that, but she did have cocaine in her system.
And about 3 o'clock in the morning, they decided that they needed to move her to the NICU. So they took her, and they took her down to the NICU to get her set up in a room there. And I called Yale to let him know what was going on. And thus started the next part of Kaylee's journey.
Yeah. So we spent quite a bit of time in the NICU. And when we walked in the first time, we said, how long are we going to be here? And they don't really answer that question.
Yeah.
The best we could get was 4 to 6 weeks is pretty much what we had
minimum,
to look forward to. She was coming off of cocaine, a pretty heavy cocaine dependency, and they had to give her enough morphine to get her comfortable and then wean her off every day. And they said there were good days and bad days, and it takes a lot of time. So we said, okay, what's the best thing we can do? And they said, well, people being here to hold her and to pray and, do what you need to do. So we did that, and we sent out a message on Facebook and said, hey, everyone pray. And we did a couple live videos. I think had 1,000 something views within a couple hours. Like it went crazy, and people just started passing it around all over the place. And people, again, all over the world were like, most of these this time we didn't even know, started praying for her. And even that $17,000 we talked about that we were just terrified. We didn't know what to do. Somebody said put a GoFundMe page up, and we're like, yeah, whatever, maybe that'll work. And we just shared our story, and we had like 70 something people give to it, and in less than a week, every cent of that $17,000 was taken care of. Again, when God says do it, we're like, okay, and he showed up. So we had a shift of people. Basically 12 out of every 24 hours we had somebody from our family or our friends, our church who is family, and like we had people around the clock that were there to hold her and take care of her. And
so thank you to all of you who did that.
Seriously. But what was supposed to take 4 to 6 weeks didn't even take 2 weeks. And she pulled out of it. God showed up, and every nurse was like, I don't understand how she's doing so well. We're like, well,
we did.
Yeah. We spent a lot of time in there talking with probably 10 or 15 nurses we got to share the gospel with and share how faithful Jesus is. We brought her home a couple weeks after being born, and really completed the family that we know that God had for us. And it's so cool just to see how he worked in everything. Now, when we started this whole process, when we started this whole adoption thing, we had no idea what this was going to look like. If we would, I think we would have tucked tail and run. I don't know. We had no clue what all was going to happen physically with the Department of Child Services and with the adoption through foster care and with all that process, and with Kaylee, we sure as heck didn't know. And
the emotional roller coaster of it all.
It's the hardest 2 years of our life. I wouldn't trade it for anything, though, because we saw God move more in those 2 years than we've ever even heard of him moving in the past. Every little thing, every moment, every time we questioned it, every time we wanted to tuck tail and run, every time we got mad at the system, every time all of this, he was always there. Our adoption story really did not happen like we expected. We didn't even really know if it would happen or what to expect, but God took control in a huge way. The Bible says that religion that God accepts as pure and faultless is this: to take care of widows and orphans. And in this city alone, there's 9,000 foster kids in a city of about 800,000 people. That's not even including the surrounding area, the 2 million people that call themselves part of Indianapolis. It's like that with cities all over the country. There's cities all over the place that are busting at the seams with kids who just need a place to go. And if every church took one foster kid, there'd be no foster system. And beyond that, there's international adoption. There's kids all over the world who are born into places that are not safe or not right, and places that we can step in as Christians and say, enough is enough, we're going to give them a home. And there's kids all over that are being born to teenagers who don't know what to do, and to parents who pass away, and all these different things. There's so many kids that just need to be taken in. If there's one thing that we've learned from this whole process, it's this: that adopting children is not the job for families who can't have their own kids. Adopting children is the job for every person that is a follower of Jesus Christ. Taking care of kids that cannot take care of themselves and taking care of the orphans is the heartbeat of God.
Whether you and your family adopt, or whether you get involved in the foster care program in whatever capacity that is, or whether you just support those who are doing it, get involved and become a part of this amazing aspect of the heart of God. to redeem and restore families, and to bring health and healing to these kids that so desperately need it. So that's our story, and we hope it's been encouraging for you, and we hope that you'll be inspired to say yes to Jesus in whatever it is that he speaks to you.
Yeah.